Welcome to Executive Exchange Radio with moderator Joe Cristiano, America's corporate exorcist. Hosted by Dr. Jennifer Beeman and George Gutierrez, trusted advisors to chief executives and business leaders across the nation. If you would like to add to the conversation, call 646-652-4620.
Welcome, everyone, to Executive Exchange Radio. I'm Joe Cristiano, your moderator, and with me today we have Mr. George Gutierrez, who will be really be our only person that I'll be speaking to. Unfortunately, Dr. Jennifer Beeman will be unable to join us today. Hopefully, she'll be returning next week. Well, George, how are you doing today?
Well, you know what? I think if I was doing any better, it might be a crime.
Okay. The epitome of optimism. Okay, that's great. Well, George, just the other day I was reading an article by, let's see, it was about Patrick Lencioni, and he wrote a book of the five dysfunctional, five dysfunctional acts of that destroy a team, and the three elements that make jobs miserable. And so I think I'd like to talk about that, because I've had jobs where I was absolutely miserable and actually didn't know why, but I was absolutely miserable. But if thinking back, I always seem to attribute the dislike of my job not so much from the work that I was doing or the people I was around, but it was the atmosphere of the workplace. And in some cases, I had such dislike for the management group that I had a difficult time on the several jobs that I had just even showing up for work. And I didn't know why. I didn't know why I was bothered so much by it. Some people weren't bothered as much. But it did make life miserable for me, and I'm sure my productivity was only a fraction of what it could have been. And am I an anomaly or what? And he talks about here anonymity, irrelevance, and immeasurement. And let's take the first one. He talks about anonymity. Employees get that way when they realize that their manager has little interest in them as human beings. And I think what he means by that is that you have to be personable. You can't be any different with your employees as you are with a good friend. But even more so because you have to have an interest in their growth, because it means the profitability of the company. Could you talk to that, please?
Yeah, I will. So, in short, I think it's about caring. You know, the manager has a genuine disposition and attitude that is both visible and demonstrable. You know, that he does in fact care for his team. One of the things that I really found interesting early on, you know, as I was developing in my career, was that, you know, we were required to be mission focused. But we broke that into two different elements. You know, we have to accomplish the mission, you know, whether it's a daily mission or what have you, but we also have to take care of others. And those two things, you know, go hand in hand. The five dysfunctions of a team, it's really a good book, and I do recommend it. It's quite a read, and I think once you start reading it, you can't put it down. And there's others written by the same author. What I do find interesting about the book, though, it's written as parables, if you would. So they're not necessarily based on real events, but there are anecdotes of things or events that seem real and feel real, especially, you know, as you read through the book. What I found interesting about this article that you're talking about is that at the beginning of it and even towards the end of it, it all surrounds itself with leadership and what it really sort of points to, let's say, to the executive is, you know, it begins with, you know, you really have to assess your managers before you give them their responsibility. to have power or exercise power over others. The interesting part about this anonymity part that we're talking about is that, and I do mean interesting because I have to be honest. As I think through it, there's an element of truth to it, the way the author addresses it, but it also comes with the risk. But what the writer is suggesting is that the employee himself or herself would try to make the connection with the manager and approach, the manager and say, this, in other words, try to influence that relationship by they themselves taking that first step. I'm not sure how that would work in some cases, while it would really work in others. So I guess it would depend on the type of environment or the type of workplace that we're talking about. Because let's say, for example, if you're in a manufacturing environment where everything is tapped down and the only thing that is expected of you is just to do your part throughout the day, and not a whole opinions are required, then I think that might be a little bit more difficult for the employee, to stop what they're doing and engage with their manager. So the onus is really on the manager, to engage those whom they have leadership over, and develop a relationship that is genuine.
That's such an interesting example that you gave, a definition, because if you look at the workplace, there's always this assumption that because a person has a higher position in the corporation than another, that person is automatically, it's assumed that this person is more intelligent, has more knowledge, has a broader scope of what needs to be done, is more accomplished, and just generally smarter. But that's not always the case. In many cases, you find that you hire a person, and that person is maybe a lot brighter than you, and yet the manager is stuck with this conundrum saying, boy, this person's going to show me up. I better not make them look too smart. And as a result, they become irrelevant. Their job becomes less relevant, because if their job becomes relevant, which is the next portion of this article, by the way, if their job is less relevant, well, they can't be that important. I'm a lot more important than the next person because my job is very important. I'm more relevant. And I wonder how people determine whether or not a person in a managerial position is actually qualified to be there, not because they know the business, not because they know the industry, or not because they're bright, they got good marks, they have a master's degree or a PhD, but because they don't know how to work with other people. They may be good on their own, but they don't work well with others.
That's really a good point. And I can tell you, let me tell you a story. You're gonna laugh, but I remember when I was very young and I was in the service, and I was an enlisted man. I had a GED. That was about it. So enlisted guys and gals are always around other enlisted folks. So we had very little involvement with the officers. And I remember, this was my first year. I was walking down the sidewalk going somewhere where I'm sure I was sent to perform some sort of menial task that was probably irrelevant for my life, but it did matter. But I saw this officer coming in my direction, and it happened to be a second lieutenant. Now, and I remember how I felt, and I think that this irrelevance point that the writer's kind of alluding to is what he means. I felt, wow, there's an officer. I need to salute that guy. Now, so here I'm going through the mechanics in my mind of, extend your fingers, make sure your thumb is properly erect, to make sure that the palm is not broken, that you bring it right to the eyebrow with a sharp movement, and then you say the greeting of the day, wait for him to salute you, and then put it down. So I'm going through all these things because I think that this person is way above me. And I'm thinking, wow, how can I be that? One day, maybe I can be that person. Well, 20 years later, I discovered that second lieutenants were the equivalent of a private. They
Right.
would, but they had the education, and they had the training, and they had the title, which is what we're talking about. So we perceive them, and believe me, they're not bad people. They're great people, great leaders too. But we perceive them, as being in a position of authority, and we perceive them as all-knowing and being better than we were because we were just the workers. Now let's turn that around. Where the rubber meets the road is how they feel. So if you have a manager that all of a sudden has a title, let's just call him a foreman, okay? And before he was a foreman, he was working on some other type of job. Well, when they get that title, oftentimes they don't have the skills of leadership and management that are required, and it goes to the over the head. So they became to exert power, if you would, over the people that they're leading, and not necessarily in a nefarious kind of way, but a lot of times because they want to attain results. Well, what happens when you behave that kind of way is that you will in fact attain results, but they will be short-lasting. Because while you can get people to do what you say because you're over them, what you do is you create resentment when you don't treat them with dignity and respect.
Right.
And that's what this irrelevance part, I think many managers and leaders don't understand, is that people want to feel that the work that they are doing means something that is, worth doing. They have some sort of an impact, for either the community or for the company or for themselves that is of value. And so if they become to believe that their leaders, don't care. Let's go back to that first one of anonymity. If that doesn't get resolved quickly, and then we move to the irrelevance part that the author is talking about, then what we do now is we create a feeling of worthlessness on the employee that will go anywhere other than for them to find a job somewhere else.
How do you determine whether or not a person can exercise this talent of recognizing anonymity, where they can realize that that their job is to ensure that people have an interest in their job to the point where they feel they are relevant to the corporation as a whole, regardless of how big the corporation is? I mean, usually people get, from my experience, they get promoted because they were the best machine operator, or they were the best welder, or they were the best stockman, or whatever the case, whatever the job function was. They showed up on time, they worked hard, and then all of a sudden their job changed. It's like taking a person who's an auto mechanic, and now you're making them a financial expert. I mean, there's no connectivity there whatsoever. There's no relevance whatsoever. But you took your best mechanic off the floor and you put him into a level of incompetence that they may never be able to transcend. How do you determine that? And then how, if a person doesn't have those talents, that person could not be promoted within the organization unless they go through some sort of special training, or they determine that they could eventually learn that.
Yeah, let's address that, because I think that's really the point that the author was bringing out. Before he went into the three points that we're talking about. But one of those that he talked about was assessment. The writer was really talking to the chief executive, the HR people, the people that are looking to promote somebody else. And what he was saying was, you need to assess who these people are before you give them that title, okay? Because once you become a title holder, then if you don't have the skills and the knowledge and the right attitude, that is required for you to, conduct the business, then instead of growing the organization, what you're going to do is you'll become a detriment to the organization. But let's go back a little bit, because I think the question or the answer has to be really framed around the irrelevance part of the article that the author was talking about. Now, without getting too scientific about this, we have to really be able to understand, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically, these needs are present in everybody, not just managers, CEOs, or workers. Okay, we all need certain things in order to be able to live. We need, to have a job. We need to have money so that we can take care of our families, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times, even though the employees become irrelevant, because they don't matter, not irrelevant, but they have the feeling of irrelevance, they'll still stick with the job, and they won't quit because they need the job. Okay, and they just can't go and go elsewhere. But believe me, they're looking, and the moment that they can find something better, they will leave you, which will create a gap in your organization. So how do we know that these people, are up to the task, if you would, before you give them this recognition, of having a title? Just because they're a super worker doesn't mean you can move them to a supervisor. Okay, so I think the best way to understand that is to make sure that the person that is going to be moved into a supervisory position has both the skills and the knowledge of those new requirements of being a manager. So what else? Because now they have new tasks. Now they're not a super worker anymore. Now they have administrative tasks. They have other types of tasks. That includes controlling, includes resources, it includes planning, and includes leading. So assessing whether or not they have those skills is an important step, before they get promoted or placed into that position. So what we like to do is we like to recommend that you begin to look at the people that have the potential, and then you begin to develop those skills through leadership development programs, through training, etc., so that when the gap is created and promotion time comes on, then they at least you don't set them up for failure.
Yeah, and it's a fine line, and it takes skills, the skill of the organization, the skill of the manager assessing the person, and then a person has to have an interest in doing that. You may have a very high-skilled employee that's great in their job, but really doesn't have the inclination or the background, the knowledge to do the next job, and they may be very unhappy in that job and do very poorly.
Yeah,
I'm sure that happens very often.
It happens, but let me give you an example of an organization that I'm very close to. I work with them all the time, and what they do is, they do various things in the manufacturing realm. Okay, but part of what they do is they do the finishing work on trucks and equipment that the government owns, and eventually, is sold to the government and is given to the troops. And then these trucks go out, into the battlefield, and these instruments are used, to defend our country and, to fight our wars overseas. Well, this company was going through, some issues some time back, and the chief executive got the whole team together. It's about 200 employees, got them all around, talk to them and say, look, guys, this is what I really want you to understand. I want you to understand that every single one of you is of value to our company. But the value that you have to our company, it's nothing compared to the value that you have to our nation. These things that you're touching today, this work that you're doing today, whether it's welding, whether it's assembling, whether it's painting it, and whether it's changing, it doesn't matter what it is that you're doing. all these things that you're touching today, it's very important. And the contributions that you're making, whether you may not be able to see them, are immeasurable. Because it is our sons and our daughters that will end up driving this truck, once you get to the other side. So your diligence, your hard work, your late hours, your dedication, to getting it done the first time with that high quality, really reflects our brand and who we are and the work that we do. Wow. That entire company was on fire after that because,
right.
That chief executive really eliminated that second point of irrelevance because now he made them feel like their contributions meant something.
Yeah.
And to them, it probably meant more than getting another pay raise, which is a different conversation altogether. Yeah. But still, though, he really tapped into that one of those hierarchy of needs, feeling that what you do is of value. It's just not another task.
Yeah. Radio. I'm your moderator, Joe Cristiano, and I think our next program will be in about 2 weeks live, but you can access this program on the Executive Exchange website. Go there and you can review it once again. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.